us. Peter, how are things with you?
Getting ready for another hard week. This is how I start the week with George. Okay, in darkness, but then again, this time of year it's dark most of the time.
Dark most of the time. Yes, and then of course you've got your Christmas vacation. Well, or Christmas, not so much vacation. Christmas holiday in Russia.
Holiday. Vacation is a legal term.
It's a legal term. So Christmas holiday that starts, I guess, what, mid-December and goes through to mid-January?
No. I mean, because most of my guests come from the West. Okay, so you know, December 23rd, it's kind of like the limit. Okay, because you can ask people to come on, but they'll say they're busy for the holidays, which is fair enough. But then again, everyone has to understand where I live, December 24th, 25th is basically meaningless for most people. There are some Catholics in Russia, but the vast majority that are religious and Christian, it is going to be in January. And so we have a very peculiar situation there. And then the Bolsheviks screwed everything up with the calendar. So we have New Year's, then we have Old New Year's, then we have Christmas, and we have Old Christmas. So we go through the hoop 4 times, okay? And so, but because that's in January, and because my guests come from the Western world, we're kind of straddle the end of the month and the beginning of the next month. And traditionally, the first 10 days of January, they're not all legal holidays, but everybody takes the days off anyway.
Right.
Yeah, we're kind of looking forward to it. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's
it'll be double duty for you at the end of the month, my friend, and you know that. Okay?
Oh, that's right. That's right. So, we were talking yesterday about Trump and Ukraine and what Trump is likely to do on Ukraine, and we're trying to figure out, trying to read the signs, because the signs are ambiguous. They could point one way, they could point another way. You can pretty much interpret his comments.
And none of these people are particularly intelligent or reliable. And you also have to understand is that there are many there that like to give the impression, my opinion only, that they like to give the impression that they have Trump's ear. But apparently, Trump, first of all, it was shot at. Okay, I don't know what his hearing is. But everybody, is chiming in that, Mr. Trump told me, blah, blah. I don't know if any of it's true, to be honest.
Right. No, I think so. But what's kind of interesting, which has emerged, is now the speculation about this peacekeeping mission. So there's no peace yet. There are no negotiation. But there is there's some sort of talk about the Europeans having a peacekeeping mission, which sounds very, very strange.
To keep what peace? To keep what peace?
To keep what peace? Now, it is true, though, that back in the 1990s, there was this strange thing called the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was there even though there was no peace. And of course, what that served was a trigger, because once they're there and they get shot at, then that could be the trigger for NATO to start bombing the Serbs, because they always blamed it on the Serbs. That was the key. That whatever happens, you blame it on the Serbs. So if for some reason it's clearly the Muslims, then basically it doesn't make the news. But if they think that it was the Serbs who had targeted the UN peacekeepers, then hey, we got to bomb the Serbs. We got to do it. We can't delay. So that's like they're clearly doing something along those lines. And the problem arose because Emmanuel Macron, back in February, had raised this issue, and we talked about it at quite some length at the time, of introducing French forces into Ukraine. And no one could quite figure out what he had in mind. I mean, what are French forces going to be doing in Ukraine? And then when he was asked this question. He was said, "I want to maintain my ambiguity," and so it's all about maintaining some sort of strategic ambiguity. But clearly, no one was buying into it, and no one really wanted to be in this strategic ambiguity, and so he dropped the idea for a time. But now, apparently, it's been revived of again introducing peacekeepers into Ukraine. So there was a long article in the Wall Street Journal about this. As you say, it's all really about thinking, oh, we have Trump's ear. And let's see if I can post it, put it up. Okay, so here's this article. And you can see here that Trump to Europe, overseeing a Ukraine ceasefire would be your job.
Oh, does this come from the NBC interview? This is what he was talking about.
No, this is based entirely on speculation.
Okay.
But you're right, because the headline is very misleading, because it says Trump to Europe, as if Trump has made some sort of a statement to Europe and he's demanding something of Europe. He has made no such statement. So he says, President-elect tells French and Ukrainian leaders he would want European troops to be present in Ukraine.
Well, Ukrainian troops in Ukraine. Okay, all right.
With the European troops.
Not off to a good start.
Not off to a good start, and then, but he's making clear that there won't be American troops, which is never, it never inspires a lot of confidence. For the Europeans to say, yeah, you mean we're going to be in the line of fire, but the United States will make sure that its troops are not in the line of fire.
Yeah, unless the logic is, and I hope it's not because it's completely flawed, well, French and German and Polish soldiers are dying in Ukraine. America to the rescue. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's the danger. There's no question. Yeah.
I mean, with certain people it would, but I mean, because, it's being telegraphed. I mean, we do have social media. We do have podcasts like this. It's not like we warned you this could happen. Right. I mean, that's what you and I talked about last February. I mean, you want a tripwire? But, it's fine to have a tripwire if it's, Afghans or Sudanese or like, oh, now you're going to throw up the French. I mean, how generous of you, okay? I don't think people are going to buy it. I just don't.
You're right. No, that's right. But that's how the Americans played. But you are right that there is clearly a very strong force in Washington that would, in those circumstances, a French soldiers getting killed, would then say, we have to go in and save the French. French are our oldest and closest ally in the world.
Remember the last time we did that in Southeast Asia? Okay.
Yes. Mitch McConnell, and we're not going to talk about that, but Mitch McConnell has written a long article in Foreign Affairs. This is a man who can barely stand on his 2 feet. I mean, literally, he can't stand on his 2 feet. He has to be propped up by his aides. But he's apparently written this long article in Foreign Affairs in which he denounces Trump for failing to carry the mantle of the United States. He's failing to be a beacon of light to the rest of the world.
Like in Iraq, like in Afghanistan.
Yes. No more isolationism. So anyway, the Wall Street Journal goes on. It says, the outlines of President-elect Donald Trump's initial efforts to end the war in Ukraine from his visit to Europe last week are starting to emerge for the first time. The main takeaway, Europe would have to shoulder most of the burden of supporting Kiev with troops to oversee a ceasefire and weapons to deter Russia. So again, he hasn't said anything along those lines, but this is how they're reading the signs from Trump.
I sometimes, I am slightly paranoid, always have been. But I mean, why are these articles being written? Is it written to intentionally to taunt me? oversee a ceasefire. What ceasefire?
What exactly? That's
What
the thing. What
ceasefire?
yeah, that's right. Well, or they're trying to create realities on the ground, and thus be able to lock Trump in, because that's the key. They want to lock the United States in. So, but they can't just say, "Oh, we'll have to have the American involvement," because if you say that, "Oh, well, the Americans are going to be involved," then of course, nobody, even Lindsey Graham, isn't going to call for Americans to be involved. So it has to be a kind of a step-by-step process. You get somebody else involved, and that serves as a tripwire to get the Americans involved.
Okay, so intentional mission creep. Okay.
I think so. And then it says, at a meeting in Paris on December the 7th, Trump told Ukrainian President Zelensky and French President Emmanuel Macron that he doesn't support Ukrainian membership in NATO, but that he wanted to see a strong, well-armed Ukraine emerge from any cessation of fighting, according to officials briefed on the meeting. Then he goes on, Trump said that Europe should play the main role in defending and supporting Ukraine, and that he wanted European troops present in Ukraine to monitor a ceasefire, according to the officials. He hasn't ruled out US support for the arrangement, although no US troops would be involved. So, there's a lot of questions that you ask. What does that mean, US support for the arrangement? Does that mean that the US would use its air power to defend the peacekeepers? Or the US would provide some kind of backup should the peacekeepers be shot at, that they would provide backup and bring the peacekeepers out? Or I mean, what does that mean, US support? Or do they think there's going to be a UN Security Council resolution sanctioning this, which seems very unlikely?
Well, also with U.S. support, George, you're doing it. Okay, this is so open-ended. Okay,
Right.
oh, we have American support. We can move forward. That's a self-fulfilling prophecy. That's what they want, obviously.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Now, there's also an interesting issue here, which is, let's say you go down this path. Okay, we'll have some kind of a negotiated ceasefire. Why do we need European peacekeepers? If you're going to have peacekeepers, why not bring them from Bangladesh or Nigeria or China or India? Those from states, there are many of them that don't have a dog in this fight. I mean, if you bring in European troops, you're bringing in NATO troops.
Exactly, George, and that's the reason why it's being proposed. It's just another back door that they're searching to have NATO in Ukraine. That's the only reason why. Why they've talked so much about Koreans. Why don't you bring the South Koreans in? Okay, and watch the perimeter. Look for North Koreans. Okay, no, this is such a complete farce.
Right. That's right. And then it says, yeah. Trump also pushed the Europeans to do more to get the Chinese to press the Kremlin to end the conflict. I don't get how the Europeans have any influence on the Chinese, and then the Chinese
are not in a very good. When it comes to the Europeans, the Chinese are not in the best of moods these days.
No, they really aren't. And they discussed using tariffs on China as a bargaining chip. Oh, yeah, good. Okay, good for you.
Yeah,
keep bargaining.
The real wizards over there at the Wall Street Journal, instead of thinking about sanctioning China, get prepared for China to start sanctioning the West. Okay,
Yes.
Who can play that game? And you
Yes.
know what? The Chinese have most of the high cards. Okay, so this is just end of empire lunacy, juvenile activity.
Right.
I mean, it's nauseating.
It is. But the thing is that the Europeans kind of opened themselves up to this with a lot of empty talk about sending their troops to Ukraine. Now, once they started, when Macron started talking along those lines, then the question, well, what do you mean? You mean sending French troops to fight alongside Ukrainians? Do you mean French troops would act as a kind of backup force? They would be involved in auxiliary roles.
Or just sit in the cafes of
Right.
Paris and have the French flag on their table.
Right. That's it. So, but they did that, and then as I said, Macron then said, well, it's strategic ambiguity, but you can't keep up the ambiguity forever. Anyway, he says Trump isn't wedded to any specific Ukraine plan yet.
Well, that's one thing that we've determined among
That
ourselves.
we've determined. That's right. And hasn't thought deeply about the issue as he prepares to take power. That we also concluded. Members of his transition team and close confidants are drawing up proposals and briefing him. I wonder who are these close confidants?
Is there a single one of them an expert on Ukraine?
No, not anyway. Yeah, because I don't think so. But I wouldn't have said Keith Kellogg is a close confidant. Tucker
Carlson,
Carlson,
as far as I can tell, he's not an expert in anything.
No, I don't think he is. And Tucker Carlson, I guess, could be a close confidant, but I doubt whether Tucker Carlson would endorse anything like this. Are drawing up proposals and briefing him. Key decisions will come after his national security team is in place and Trump has had further conversations with allies and potentially Putin himself. And then he says the discussions over placing European troops on the ground in Ukraine are still at an early stage with several unresolved questions, including which European countries would be involved, the number of troops, Washington's role in supporting the arrangement, and whether Russia would accept a deal involving troops from NATO countries.
I mean, is that a rhetorical question?
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to bring in troops from NATO countries, then the whole point would have been lost. The whole point of the Russia's so-called special military operations would have been lost if you're going to have NATO in Ukraine. So it doesn't sound likely as Russia would accept any deal that involves troops from NATO countries.
And plus, if it were to come to bear, I mean, they can hold the NATO flag, they can hold the French flag, but if any military contingent that is armed that can kill Russians, they will be obliterated. And the Russians simply won't care where you're from, okay? And that is just should be obvious. It should be, oh, I'm holding a NATO flag. You can't touch me. Well, if you're trying to kill Russians, you're fair game. Okay.
No, I agree, and I think the NATO's problem in those circumstances would be that they can't very well invoke Article 5. I mean, if you volunteered to go into Ukraine and you get shot at by the Russians, then how does Article 5 come into it? It's not like
that'd be a violation
of NATO territory.
That would be a violation of Article 1.
It would be a violation of Article 1. So you don't have a leg to stand on if you're going to try and say, oh, we're under attack from Russia. And it's saying, well, no, not really. I mean, we're under attack from you. So it's kind of an interesting I mean, if there's serious conversation going on like this, because it is reminiscent of what happened when they were bombing Yugoslavia at the time of Kosovo, because you recall Yugoslavia said, you can't go enter Kosovo if it's NATO. We're not going to have NATO forces in Kosovo. And then, eventually, obviously, Yugoslavia much weaker and relented, but it was still not under NATO command. It was under theoretically United Nations command, but there were NATO forces that entered Kosovo. But of course, the moment they entered, they started carving it up among themselves. I mean, it wasn't a peacekeeping force. It was exactly as Yugoslavia predicted. They would grab Kosovo and keep it for themselves. So the Russians are well aware of what happened in Kosovo in 1999.
Exactly.
And then on Thursday, several European foreign ministers met in Berlin for discussions on security guarantees. NATO chief Mark Rutte invited the leaders of the UK, France, Germany, Italy, and Poland, as well as Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa. Boy, that's a name entirely forgotten. It's hard to remember that there is a European Council president.
Okay.
He's taken over from Charles Michel.
Yeah, that's how this is he debuts on the Gaggle.
He
Okay.
debuts.
Thankfully, it's a pronounceable name. Okay.
It is exactly. So they all met with Zelensky in Brussels on to meet. Oh no, they're going to meet with Zelensky on December the 18th. So that's on Wednesday to discuss the security guarantees.
You know, I sometimes I try to imagine what it must be like for Zelensky. It's just like you said, you want us in NATO,
Right?
We're
That's
wet
right.
and willing, but come on, you guys.
Right,
No. We have to have another meeting. Okay,
yes,
have another meeting.
That's right. Let's yes. And then any European troops on the ground would be part of a specific peacekeeping or ceasefire monitoring force and wouldn't be a NATO operation. Well, that's very cute, officials said. Oh, it won't be a NATO operation, even though we'll have NATO force. Oh, that's it. That'll fool the Ruskies. Okay, well, all right, we agree to that. Yeah, we'll have all these NATO countries involved, but it won't be under NATO command. Oh, good.
Perish the thought, George.
Yes. The Biden administration's many European capitals and the incoming Trump administration have all spoken of wanting to avoid any direct fighting between Russia and NATO troops in Ukraine. So that's the way to avoid direct fighting. Bring in NATO troops. That's good thinking. Fearing it could escalate into a global conflict.
You think?
Yeah. However, there are widespread fears that even if Moscow accepts a ceasefire, it will use it to rebuild its forces and try again to invade unoccupied areas of Ukraine. And by the same token, there are widespread fears in Moscow that NATO will use the interim period to rearm Ukraine and try to invade those territories that it claims are Ukraine. So,
but the latter, what George just said, has been telegraphed from day one. Okay, so, I mean, because and maybe we'll talk about it later in this podcast. But there were the mandarins of the universe in alternative media, basically saying we need. And I know specific names in my head. We need a Minsk III. Okay, I mean, people like that should be just taken out to pasture. Okay, right. And not show their face in public because the failure of Minsk I and II on the part of the West gave you the special military operation.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It was a catastrophe. It's an 8-year catastrophe. In February, Macron floated the idea of Europe putting troops in Ukraine following discussions between European leaders in Paris, although he didn't specify the conditions for doing so. No, he did not. The idea was at the time dismissed by Berlin and NATO, among others, but Trump's push for a ceasefire has revived discussions.
Is Trump pushing for a ceasefire? Is the Wall Street Journal putting words into his mouth?
You're absolutely right. I see no evidence of any push.
I see no evidence either. I mean, George and I commented that the weeks after the election, that Trump seemed to go dark on almost everything. Okay, and particularly this claim that he would end it in 24 hours. But over the last few news cycles, he's been quite vocal because he's been pressed by it. Okay, and as far as I can tell, George, we can go back and look, but the word ceasefire have not crossed his lips.
No, not at all. I mean, he talked in general terms. Oh, we must have a ceasefire, but it doesn't sound like he's pushing for it. I mean, he's saying he's pushing for something because he also said that
you get the impression. At least it's my impression. My impression is that somehow miraculously, as an act of God or a black swan event, suddenly there's a ceasefire, and now Donald Trump can work on his peace plan. Right. That's what it looks like to me.
Right. No, that's right. And Then he says, there are still multiple doubts about the idea. European governments are likely to be wary about a force that would put them in a position of having to resist a Russian breach of a ceasefire. Well, what what is then? What are you doing as a peacekeeper? What is it then? What exactly
What
is a
is
peacekeeper?
what is this article about? Because George and I come across this very convoluted thought process. I mean, now the Wall Street Journal is arguing against itself. We have watched, particularly with Ukraine, just schizophrenics in front of
Right.
us. They're arguing against themselves here. Okay, and why are
Yes.
you pointing this? What is the point of this?
Right. Right. Yeah. No. But that's the thing. If you have a peacekeepers, then theoretically, all a peacekeeper does is observe any breaches of a ceasefire. A peacekeeper is not supposed to get involved in the fight.
Enforce a peace.
No, that's it. You just simply observe. And then, if there are breaches of the ceasefire, you report the breaches. You're not supposed to start shooting yourself. But here, you got the Wall Street Journal that's suggesting, well, they're going to come in and maybe they will start shooting. But that makes absolutely no sense, of course, unless the whole point of having these peacekeepers is to entrench NATO in Ukraine, so that they're there and now they're thoroughly entrenched inside Ukraine.
Maybe it will be brought up in this article, but the most important thing at this stage of this ridiculous approach is that Ukrainians would have every reason to break a ceasefire.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes, exactly. They would have every reason to provoke. Which is why I think Zelensky is generally quite favorable to the idea, because he sees this as a mechanism to get NATO involved. If you provoke the Russians, then you get Russia has breached the ceasefire. And that's always going to be the storyline. Oh, Russia is breaking the ceasefire.
Of course.
French officials,
just trickery, deceptions, lies. And the Wall Street Journal is trying to put it's putting lipstick on this pig. Okay.
Yes, that's right. So it says French officials have made clear that the idea would need to involve some kind of U.S. backup. Yeah, I mean, no way. We're not going to be right in the line of fire, if the Americans aren't right behind us. Something it isn't clear a Trump administration would consider. No, they wouldn't. It isn't clear European countries would be able to spare the troops or get the political backing to participate. And then, above all, the Kremlin may balk at any plan that allows troops from NATO countries to be present in Ukraine. Putin said earlier this year that European talk of sending NATO country troops into Ukraine during the war raises the real threat of a nuclear conflict. And then it says, on Thursday, Macron traveled to Poland to discuss Ukraine and security guarantees with Polish leaders. At a press conference after the meeting, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said his country had no plans to put troops in Ukraine and wouldn't be pushed into any decisions by others. Well, who are these others other than Macron? And so here is the story. This is from the Irish Times, but it's based on wire stories. Poland plays down prospect of sending peacekeepers to Ukraine. And then it goes on. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said his country had no plans to send peacekeepers to Ukraine, as he agreed with visiting French President Emmanuel Macron that Europe must be involved strongly in any talks on ending Russia's invasion. I always love it when they say we need to be involved.
I always find that really cute. We really don't want any risk, but we demand to be at the table. Okay.
We demand to, right. But they don't intend to change policy in any way. I mean, one thing you could do is, curb your policy and thereby stop fueling the war and thereby facilitate peace talks. I mean, that could be one way of doing it. But no. We need to be strongly involved. But we're going to keep sending arms, and but we're not going to risk our own people We're not going to get any Poles being shot at, but we'll keep it going, and we want a place at the table.
Well, it must be involved. You're already involved. Okay.
Exactly. Exactly. Several EU states and Ukraine are concerned that US President-elect Donald Trump may try to push through a rapid deal to end Europe's biggest war since 1945, potentially handing the initiative to Russia after he claimed to be able to resolve the conflict in one day. So again, the constantly concern.
Look at this sentence here. It's very interesting.
Mhm.
Several EU states and Ukraine are concerned that U.S. President-elect Donald Trump may try to push through a rapid deal to end Europe's biggest war since 1945. Why doesn't Europe end the war?
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
It's on their continent.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
It's in their security interest. Okay.
But the other thing is,
because this embedded in this is the illogical premise of NATO after the Cold War. Okay,
right. That's right. But I always love when these journalists write these sentences. They are concerned he may try to push through a rapid deal to end Europe's biggest war since 1940. Why would you be concerned rather than, hey?
Why is that a bad idea?
Exactly. Hey, the war could end quickly. I mean, why are you concerned about a possibility that this war could end? The killing would stop. I mean, isn't that a good thing? And so these are the journalists who are writing these things. Again, they're all far away from the action, but they're all blowhards. They want somebody else to go on fighting.
This is something that George and I have watched the evolution of from the 1970s all the way to the present. This kind of journalism didn't exist when George and I were coming up. They didn't set themselves up as philosopher kings.
Right.
They didn't. I can remember reading the New York Times and the Washington Post, and it was the facts, ma'am, just the facts. It was very fact driven. Now the editorial page, the opinions, they were very as we would expect. But this is not journalism.
Right. No, I think that's right, and they're completely identifying themselves with one side. So where I think before, they tended to be pro-U.S. government. They didn't wholly identify themselves completely with one side.
Yeah, but George is right. I mean, you could tell the liberal bias. I mean, obviously, but they didn't become advocates of policies.
Right.
America should be great in the world. Okay.
Right.
Things like that. America is a force for good in the world. That's that would kind of inform them. But I was very, very young, but I remember the negotiations, the Vietnam War, and it was basically really a ledger. This is what the U.S. is looking at. This is what Vietnam is looking at, and this is what China and Russia are looking at. But it was very, block by block by block. It wasn't this kind of verbiage.
No, that's right, and that's why they present this in the way that we're very concerned that Donald Trump may try to push through a rapid deal. Well, there are people who are concerned like this. People like, Mitch McConnell and the rest of them are concerned. But there may be others who think that this is a really good idea to bring this thing to an end. There are not just in the United States, but there are others inside Europe who think, hey, this might be a really good opportunity. Well, when you have two sides of a debate, then you should report both sides and not identifying yourself with one side and say, well, we're very concerned. Yeah, I mean, people you talk to are concerned. How about talking to the other side if you're going to do journalism? But that
the other voices, well, in the beginning they were single voices, and then there were multiple voices. Now it's turning into a chorus of voices. Okay, it would be very nice to see how others see this. But no, the Irish Times and their journalists, they have taken on the mantle of state policy. That's not journalism.
That's right. No, it's not. And so he has earlier this year, Mr. Macron refused to rule out the possible future deployment of European troops in Ukraine. And this issue resurfaced before his talks on Thursday with Mr. Tusk, whose government, like its predecessor, has been a staunch ally to Kiev. And then Tusk says, to cut off speculation about potential presence of this or that country in Ukraine, after reaching a ceasefire, decisions concerning Poland will be made in Warsaw and only in Warsaw. At the moment, we're not planning such activities. Now,
I could just see it, okay, because in September 1939, Poland had security guarantees from the UK and from France to guarantee its sovereignty, because we knew that Hitler was on the march. There was plenty of ample empirical evidence going from one country to the next. And but Poland, we're going to draw the line, okay? And I think Tusk is saying, yeah, we're going to send troops into Poland, and then Poland finds it's, well, where's everybody else?
Right?
Again.
Yeah, no, that's right. But it says the decision will be made in Warsaw and only in Warsaw, which is a very strange thing to say. I thought you're a member of NATO. I thought you're a member of the EU.
Where's Macron? Why was Macron there? If you're going to say that,
exactly, and you're also now a member of this contact group. You're some sort of a contact group. You know, you're among the leaders of Europe in making these sorts of decisions. So suddenly, national sovereignty. I didn't know that was a thing.
Well, I'm absolutely convinced that, the contact group and the Rammstein group, I think when leaders are presented with that, they say, is there a buffet with it? Is there a menu with it? Because how do these people get anything done? They're in the contact group, they're in the reconstruction
group. It's all
group, and how to get the conscription age lowered in Ukraine group. Okay.
Right. Yeah. No, that's right. It's wonderful. Yeah. And Zelensky gets to travel everywhere. I don't think he should be allowed to travel. I mean, I think he should always fear for his life from the moment he gets on a plane and goes to Brussels or Paris or wherever. But instead, he's allowed to fly wherever he wants.
Well, I think the deal is, I'll have the duffel bags of cash, okay, and that's why they let him back into Ukraine, because he has to divvy up. I mean, he's got clients he's got to pay off. That keeps him alive.
So both leaders said Europe must be ready to play a big role in trying to resolve the conflict when Mr. Trump returns to the White House. And then it says Ukraine must be present at every round of talks, and every variant, every proposal must also be accepted by our friends in.
Okay, so let's interpret this for everybody. Both leaders said Europe must be ready to play a big role in trying to resolve the conflict. No, what that sentence means is make sure Trump keeps it going.
Yes, exactly.
That's what that means. It's not to resolve it. It's not to let it end.
Yes, exactly. That's why Macron flies to Warsaw, because he's alarmed about the possibility that this could end. So it says, no, well, we're not going to get shot at, but Ukraine must be involved at every stage, because it's essentially, Ukraine that wants to do this. And what Ukraine wants is some kind of, de facto, de jure, or whatever, NATO membership. That's Zelensky's goal, and that's what they're trying to facilitate one way or another. They can't do it de jure, so they want to make Ukraine a de facto member of NATO.
Okay.
And then, so it says, Mr. Macron said the Trump administration has said it wants to try to change the course of the conflict, and so we need to work very closely with the Americans and, of course, with Ukraine to find a possible way forward that takes into account the interests of Ukraine and its sovereignty, as well as the interests and security of the Europeans.
Okay, and the security for Russia?
No, that doesn't count. And so we have the Kiev Independent, which then brings up the question of, well, what do the Germans think? Discussion about German peacekeepers in Ukraine, irresponsible, says opposition leader, who's likely, incidentally, to be German chancellor in a couple of months. In fact, there's a vote today in the Bundestag to express no confidence in Sergeant Schultz's
Well,
government.
there are press reports, and again, I'm just relaying press reports. I can't authenticate it, but apparently nobody in Europe wants to talk to Schultz anymore.
No, but I also read the report saying Schultz was all smiles at the Bundestag today. I think he seems to be really happy that he's not going to be chancellor for much because he seemed in a very good mood.
Very reminiscent of Biden's meeting with Trump. Just like, I'm going to stab everyone in the back on the way out. Okay, and I'm going to trip you up as much as I possibly can.
Yes.
I mean, that man was. I mean, it actually revitalized Joe Biden. He was actually lucid. Okay,
he said he was very lucid and
his glee to
yes.
wreck the Democratic Party. We won't go into all of these pardons, which is just absolutely mind-boggling what he's been doing.
Mind-boggling.
Okay,
yes.
what he wants to do, George, he's burning the Democratic Party to the ground on his way out.
That's right. Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Yeah. No, he's very, very annoyed by the way they treated him. But he's still.
Well, no, I mean, who knows? Sergeant Schultz, he could end up on the board of Gazprom. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think he'll be okay. But in the case of, I mean, he knew perfectly well that once he fired the economy minister, who was a Free Democrat, he knew the Free Democrats were going to walk out of the coalition, and therefore he had no majority. So he knew he was signing his death warrant, or the death warrant of the government, and he's happy to have done so. But Biden, I think he really is very upset because he thinks, hey, I've served the Democratic Party all my life, and they stabbed me in the back. So I think he's very, particularly Obama. He thinks I've been a loyal follower of Obama's, and this is the way he treated me.
No library for you, Joe.
No. Anyway, he says, Germany's conservative opposition leader Friedrich Merz said that any speculation about deploying German troops to ensure a ceasefire are irresponsible at this time. The CDU-CSU Alliance Chancellor candidate was reacting to recent comments by German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, who said that the deployment of German troops in Ukraine in case of a ceasefire should not be ruled out. She's
the bad news, everyone. And this is my hunch, and I think it's George's as well. The way the result of the election that's coming, she actually could squeak into the coalition and still be foreign minister.
Definitely. That's
on the cards. It's on the cards.
It's very much on the cards. Very much on the cards. So he said, "Oh, this would be irresponsible." Now remember, Friedrich Merz doesn't think it's irresponsible to send these Taurus missiles to Ukraine so that Ukraine can then fire the Taurus missiles deep inside Russia. He doesn't think that there's anything irresponsible at that. German missiles, coming from Germany, being fired deep inside Russia, he doesn't think that's irresponsible. But sending Germans into the line of fire, now that he's not going to put up with. So he says, the war in Ukraine continues. Russia continues to act cruelly against the civilian population. And then we are all thinking about how to end this war. The question is how to achieve this. Now, this idea, Annalena Baerbock also talks like this. We are all thinking, I'm thinking about how to end this war. I'm working 24 hours a day to thinking about how to end this war. And you're doing it by sending more and more arms, weapons, artillery shells into Ukraine. That's the way you're thinking about how to end this war. And that's what we say. Yeah, we have the Taurus missiles. That's the best way to end this war.
At the risk of sounding like a broken record, their whole approach is flawed.
Yes.
Instead of ending the war, how do we get peace and security for all? That's the way this thing is going to eventually. If the Russians have to do it unilaterally,
right,
it will happen.
And then
you don't have to agree on that point.
Yeah, okay. Well,
I can see the hesitation. It's okay.
I think that's a desirable goal. I mean, whether we get there,
we can move on.
Speaking in Germany's parliament, Scholz ruled out the possibility of deploying German troops to Ukraine at this stage. He stressed that there's an agreement with Baerbock and Defense Minister Boris Pistorius on the matter, adding that the Green Party's foreign minister was giving a diplomatic answer about a future hypothetical situation. He has no control over Baerbock. I mean, she's shooting her mouth off all the time, and she doesn't pay any attention to him, who's supposed to be the chancellor. You know, he's always doing this, you know, kind of sweeping up after her. Oh, well, giving a diplomatic answer to about a hypothetical. No, she just said we can't rule out a German presence in Ukraine.
Yeah, she's a poster child for the new generation of
exactly
leaders. Yeah.
The chancellor avoided a question about deploying peacekeepers after a possible ceasefire. Pistorius said there are still too many unknowns, but did not rule out the possibility. So he also doesn't rule out the possibility. Pistorius will almost certainly continue to be the defense minister. If there is a ceasefire, and if it then comes to the point when someone, whoever it is, plans to use military means to ensure peace, that would depend on the type of mandate, the scope and requirements and acceptance of the warring parties. How on earth?
You can't ensure peace.
You can't. That's exactly right. There's no such thing as kind of peacekeepers. I mean, all you can do is be an observer and just, and then report breaches of peace. You can't start, the moment you start shooting at one side or another, you're not a peacekeeper anymore. Peacekeepers, that's all peacekeepers are. They observe breaches, but they can't become a belligerent. And they can deliberately obfuscating and suggesting that somehow, well, we're going to be involved in the fighting, but we'll call ourselves peacekeepers. And here is our friend Politico. And it says, EU foreign policy chief downplays Ukraine peace prospects. This is almost like kind of a redundancy, because we know who the EU foreign policy chief, and of course she downplays peace prospects. I mean, that's who she is. And it says that it's too early to talk about a peacekeeping mission to Ukraine, as Russia is not interested in peace, the EU's top diplomat Kaja Kallas said on Monday. First, there has to be peace.
George, I'm sorry, but
okay.
When I hear her name, only one thought that comes to my mind is I'm glad she's on their side.
It's very interesting how the EU has so identified itself with the most extreme elements within Europe. I mean, rather than, you would expect, say, France or Germany or Italy to be the more moderate voices. And they're not necessarily, but at least you might think that they're more moderate. But instead, it's the Poles and the Baltic Chihuahuas that do most of the shouting.
Yep.
It's Kaja Kallas who's always shooting her mouth off. First, there has to be peace in order to send peacekeepers. Okay, that's right. And Russia does not want peace. That is very clear. It's very clear. Kallas told reporters ahead of the first meeting of EU foreign ministers who will chair since taking over as the bloc's high representative for foreign affairs and security policy. Her comments came in the wake of growing pressure from the team of US President-elect Donald Trump to find a quick way of ending the war. Again, they're saying growing pressure. Where's the growing pressure, other than in the minds of these hangers-on called reporters? And she says, it's too early to speculate about peacekeepers, says Dutch Foreign Minister Caspar Veldkamp. Dutch foreign minister. Again, the Dutch are always, in the forefront.
You don't come across very many Caspars, do you?
No. I like the name, Caspar Veldkamp.
I do too. That's a nice name.
Yeah. You need, if you were writing a novel, that would be a good villain.
Yeah, that's a novel name. That's a novel.
Yes, Caspar Veldkamp. He's the head of some drug ring.
It doesn't evoke positive feelings.
No, sinister. I don't think. No, I don't. Okay. Zelensky has been talking about diplomatic solutions next year, and it's very important that between now and the moment that he believes negotiation could start, Ukraine is fully supported, and that means military support, and that means support in the field of energy infrastructure. It also means financial support. So again, these Dutch, they're amazing. Again, the smaller you are, the more belligerent you are. Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Chakna also stressed that Russian leader Vladimir Putin has not changed the goal of the war he launched more than 2 years ago. Ukrainians are not asking for any mission right now. They are asking for weapons. They are asking for air defense. They are asking for support. Let's give it, he said. And so that's the news from the NATO front. I don't see too much movement here towards peace. But it is probably true that they are very nervous about what Trump might do. I mean, they simply don't know. They're trying to read all these signs and tea leaves, and they don't know what he's going to do.
I'm nervous about what Trump is going
Yeah,
to do.
I agree. But this whole thing about peacekeepers, that's a really dumb idea. I mean, it's very hard to see how anything good can come out of and how it can actually work in any way.
Unless it's an intentional tripwire. That's it.
I think so. Yeah. But that's right. It's an intentional tripwire. But that means the only way that can work is if the Americans go along with the plan of the tripwire. Yeah. There won't be any American involvement, but if you blow the head off any Frenchman, then Americans will come in. But it's very hard to see how the Russians could accept that. I mean, they
won't. But what is important to consider here, I don't want to get too philosophical or anything, but the American electorate decided what it wanted.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
They voted for a guy that says he's going to end the conflict. Now,
right.
Georgian, I have no idea how he's going to do that. Trump has no idea. But the result is it's a noble one. Okay, the American people, the electorate, spoke overwhelmingly. Okay, yes. I don't know if you saw in liberal media, Trump's victory really wasn't overwhelming. God, these people drive you nuts. Okay, it was a world historic blowout.
That's
okay.
Right. Yes, exactly. But because we're not going to get those, the Nixon Reagan landslides. I mean, America's changed, and you don't have that anymore. But by today's standards, that is a big victory. And not, first of all, he won the popular vote, which Republicans have not won. They won it in 2004, but other than that, the last time they won it was 1988. So only once in the last 36 years, the Republicans won the popular vote, and he won every single battleground state. That's a blowout. That's it. So it wasn't competitive. But you're right. The American people rendered a verdict. So now what happens is the elites decide, well, we'll just ignore that verdict. We'll ignore what the American people said. We're just going to do what we would have done anyway. I mean, that's the result.
And all of the articles that you presented us, George, it's just it's a circle jerk to try to control Trump. Now, it's very possible, everyone, if this plan ever comes to fruition, which I'm tending to doubt, to be honest with you, George and I could be fundamentally against it. Okay. Whatever, and because of the people that are surrounding him here, but this media onslaught, it just never ends. Right. It never ends. All of these people are looking for a way to keep the conflict going.
Yes.
And they want the American taxpayer to keep it going.
That's right. Exactly. They want to keep it going, and then they can then say, well, we're not the ones who want to keep it going. It's Putin. It's all Putin. It's the Russians who want to keep it going. That's when Kaya Kallas says, oh, Putin wants this war to go on. It's all the Russians.
No, the Russians have repeatedly given their outlook and how to start resolving it. They made it very, very clear. The Russians don't want peace. Well, then why were they in Istanbul? I mean, and giving the Ukrainians what George and I would assume would call a sweetheart deal.
Exactly. It was a sweetheart deal that the Ukrainians at the time wanted to accept. I mean, that was the thing. I think it was a lousy deal for the Russians, but that's why the Ukrainians said, "Hey, it's unbelievable. We're in a better position now than we were before February the 24th. So yeah, let's take the deal." And then Boris Johnson, acting on behalf of the Americans, has said, "Hey, don't win. We've got the Russians on the run. Let's keep the war going. We've got the Russians on the run." So 100,000 or more Ukrainian deaths later, we still got the Russians on the run. I mean, it was so irresponsible. That kind of so inhumane, disgusting in every way, just to tell them, "Hey, let's just keep this war going because we've got the Russians on the run." So that's one aspect of the Trump policy. The other aspect, which I think is kind of interesting, is Iran, and I think that here Trump's approach may be a little bit different, because I think that when it comes to Ukraine, I think instinctively, I think he does want to end this war. I mean, I think he for whatever reason, he thinks that Russia can be a useful ally against China. I mean, I think that's probably somehow Trump's calculation, deep-seated calculation, even though he doesn't quite know how to bring this to an end.
I think that's his meta approach, because, and George and I can say that with absolute assurance, because he was talking this way in the 1990s about
exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, there's nothing new about that.
Yeah.
I also feel that he doesn't want to get stuck with the stench of a Biden policy. Right. Now, the policy against Iran goes back to the 1980s. Okay, yeah. So that's new. That's right. Okay, but this, he sees this as Biden's war. I wish he would say it more emphatically, right. And just to tie a bow on it. Okay, because there's, what is the upside? Well, yeah, you can keep giving Russia a headache for years to come. Yeah, I guess that's a positive for the foreign policy elite in the West. But is that really a dividend payment? Is it enough? I don't know. In their mind,
no, maybe. I don't know. But it's clear, though, that among the foreign policy elites in the United States and in Europe, they regard Russia as enemy number one. It's not that they like China at all. They don't like China, but they put China as enemy number two. Trump is a little different, and some of the people around Trump are also along that line say, no, China is number one. We should deal with China primarily, and therefore it makes sense to bring this thing to an end. But I think Trump and the Trumpians, if whatever if we can call them, are in a minority on this issue. I mean, because they're overwhelmed by everybody who's obsessed with Russia. All the people that Mitch McConnell is writing for when he publishes this article in Foreign Affairs. Oh my God, Trump is letting down our allies, but he's only focused on Russia in that case. Now, the interesting thing about Iran is whichever way you look at it, and this is the evil mentality within Washington, which is whichever way you look at it, there's a reason to attack Iran. If you say, hey, look, Iran is really weak now. Look, they took a hammering with Hezbollah. They've taken a hammering with the loss of Assad. They took a hammering from Israel. Now's the time to do it. We've been waiting 45 years. Now's the time to strike. So that could be, you can use that as a justification for attacking. You can also use the other one, which was used against Saddam Hussein. Iran is really dangerous. Iran is 5 minutes away from having nuclear weapons. This is the time to make our move, because we delayed for, even 5 minutes, and suddenly Iran has nuclear weapons. Whichever way you go, it's always time to attack Iran.
Absolutely. And I mean, I don't want to get into it. I mean, I know it's one of the biggest stories in the U.S. about these drones and all of that. But I mean, there was some clown. I just saw a snippet of it on one of these podcasts, that he's absolutely convinced a Iranian mothership, right, has brought, come into the atmosphere or enter the atmosphere and sending out only. I mean, it was just absolutely lunatic. Okay. Right. But he was allowed to speak for like 2 or 3 minutes nonstop on Fox primetime. Okay.
That's right.
So, And this is the drumbeat. You're right. I mean, we were very honored to talk to Vanessa Beeley a few days ago. Wonderful person, wonderful observations.
Right.
The appetite comes with the eating, and
Right.
they feel that they got a wind to their back, and
Right.
there's unresolved business here, and
Right.
I think that again, murmurings coming out of the Israeli government that they're speaking with Trump and his people
Right.
about a preemptive attack on Iran's nuclear
Right.
facilities. I mean, this all has to be taken very seriously.
Has to be taken very seriously, and really, you can see how it's step by step. The United States and Israel have been, warming up to this onslaught against Iran. First of all, they took out Soleimani. Why did they take out Soleimani? I mean, there was nothing urgent that needed doing in early 2020, other than this is a person who was likely to rally Iran against the United States, against Israel. He was not really one of the clerics, and therefore they saw Soleimani as a real danger. They wanted to eliminate him as a political figure in Iran. And then you got to take out Nasrallah, again, somebody that was clearly would be an important ally of Iran. So you're taking out all of the people who would thwart an onslaught against Iran. So I just want to show you, because speaking of Iran, David Ignatius of the Washington Post, and Ignatius, although terrible person, is interesting to read simply because he's speaking on behalf of the CIA, the deep state. Those are his sources. So he's ready to speak when he writes. This is coming straight from the horse's mouth. This is coming from inside the bowels of the U.S. government. So he wrote this article. Let's see. I think it was yesterday. Let's see if I can find this. And here we have, with Iran's guard down, the U.S. and Israel face an urgent choice. No, again, notice how Ignatius completely identifies himself with his sources. U.S. and Israel face an urgent choice.
Well, I don't. Maybe it's explained, but with Iran's guard down, what does that mean?
That's right. So
I mean, I can see that that could apply to Assad, and he's gone. I think that could have applied to Hezbollah. Hezbollah
right.
is licking its wounds, but how does that apply to Iran? I'm not sure.
Well, I don't know. That's the thing. I mean, we don't know. Therefore, it's all the people who are within the intelligence world who are telling us that Iran is either very weak or very strong. So, which is exactly what we did in the case of Iraq.
That Iran, for its own national security, Hezbollah didn't play a role in that. Syria didn't play a role in that. The role is the axis, or so-called axis of resistance. That's what was important.
Well, that's exactly. But if Iran,
that doesn't play into that. It's just.
But if Iran does come under attack, if Iran does come under attack, those proxies will be very important. That's an important part.
Oh no, those proxies are gone. Okay.
Right, those are gone. That's why. So that's why, if Iran does come under attack, Iran really doesn't have any allies. I mean, otherwise they have allies in the Middle East who would be helping out Iran.
I don't think an attack on Iran that they would, they could have at one point in time played a marginal role, but not a significant one. Okay, but that's neither here nor there, because things have changed. Go ahead.
Right. Iran appears to be at the most precarious moment in its modern history. Its proxy armies have been crushed in Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria, and it appears to be nearly naked to attack after a wave of pinpoint Israeli airstrikes on its air defense system in October.
Okay, well, those are just talking points.
Well, these are talking points. I mean, we don't know. I mean, he's getting it from within the U.S. government. We can believe that, we can not believe it, but that's what they're putting out. We showed that Iran is vulnerable, argued Yoav Gallant, who the Israel defense minister who was fired recently. And then he's saying that Gallant explained during a briefing with me in Washington this week that Israel's devastating but relatively little discussed bombing campaign on October the 26th created a window to act against Iran before it produces a nuclear weapon. So you notice, again, Israel has always been pressing America to attack Iran. And then Gallant is kind of trying to have it both ways. Well, hey, we just inflicted this devastating attack, but now's the time to attack because, more fully, because if we don't, they're going to produce a nuclear weapon. Any minute now, they're going to have a nuclear weapon.
Iran has been any minute producing a nuclear weapon since 1999. Okay,
Right.
Sorry.
Right. Oh, that's right. And U.S. decisions.
If they were smart, they would be, and if they were smart, they should already have one. Okay.
That's right. U.S. decisions about how to exploit Iran's weakness, whether by negotiating a binding nuclear agreement or failing that, taking decisive military action, will fall to President-elect Donald Trump.
The same guy that got out of the nuclear deal with Tehran. Smart article. This really
That's right.
So stupid.
That's right. Asked last month about the possibility of war with Iran after he takes office on January the 20th, Trump told Time magazine ominously that anything can happen. I always like the ominously, but that's kind of what you want to happen. I mean, you're saying it's ominously.
And everybody, because he's president-elect, he's getting briefings every single day.
That's right. And then global attention has shifted to Trump, but senior Biden administration officials tell me they also recognize the opportunity ahead for coercive diplomacy about nuclear issues with a weakened Iran. Though Israel played the decisive role in humbling Iran, President Joe Biden provided an important backstop by deploying U.S. carriers, planes, submarines, and other forces. So now he's suggesting that before January the 20th, Biden, on his way out, could join in some sort of an attack on Iran. The Biden administration officials tell me they recognize the opportunity ahead for coercive diplomacy. I always love coercive diplomacy. It's no diplomacy. I mean, if you punch someone in the face, that's not diplomacy. About nuclear issues with a weakened Iran. And then goes on, Israel's October the 26th assault was calculated to leave Iran unprotected against a future attack. An astonishing wave of 120 jets took part in the raid, an Israeli military source said. The Israeli planes targeted air defense radars and anti-aircraft batteries protecting Tehran, as well as key factories producing fuel for Iranian ballistic missiles. The attack was in retaliation for Iran's October the 1st bombardment of Israel with about 200 ballistic missiles. But the planning began many months before.
Yeah, well, that is the official account.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, we have.
There's a lot of other smart people that
there are, but you can take whichever argument. That's the argument presented by Israel, but Israel wants to present that argument. On the other hand, you got the others who say no, it didn't hurt one bit. Until we actually see, the action, we can't really make a judgment. But what I think is instructive when you look at an article such as that is that this is clearly what's going on inside the U.S. government and inside the Trump team. I mean, they're all on the same page. I mean, there's a remarkable continuity in U.S. foreign policy. I mean, for all the sort of Biden this and Trump that, Biden hasn't really changed any of Trump's policies.
Well, George, let's look at it. Let's just strip it all away. Trump is from the get-go has not been on board with the Ukraine project.
Right.
So he's made concessions, like with Mike Johnson and the $61 billion and all that. Right. He's all over the place.
Yeah.
But that's something that you can attach to him. You can identify with him. Yeah. And then you have these sycophants all around him. That's what Trump wants. Okay. Well, the Iran thing is on, right? Yeah, no problem. All of these people, if Trump were to turn around and say, I've changed my position on Ukraine, maybe with the exception of J.D. Vance, I still
Right.
have some hope for him. They'd all get in line.
Right.
That's the only thing that is different here. This is not a new foreign policy, everyone. George and I will chronicle for you how it has not changed one iota.
Right.
And I'm making that prediction.
No, that's right. And of course, that's the irony of the whole thing with Trump is that you say, okay, he seems skeptical of the Biden project, but then the question arises: well, why then did you boast during your term in office that you went far beyond Obama in providing lethal aid to Ukraine? So, I mean, Obama had drawn a line. He said, no, we're not going to provide lethal aid. But it was you broke that. And you boasted about that. And even just to show how he's been all over the place. Remember, even during his term in office, he held up the military aid to Ukraine. He held it up. Now, he held it up for the wrong reasons because Zelensky wasn't playing ball with him on the whole issue of Biden and Russiagate and so on. But nonetheless, he held it up correctly, saying, hey, I'm the president and I have to concern myself with what's in the national security interest of the United States. And it's not in America's national security interest to send off $500 million just because Congress appropriated $500 million worth of weapons for Ukraine. He held it up, and it was, oh my God, he's violating the Constitution. It's not violating the Constitution. It's he as president can make such a decision, and he's just saying, I'm not going to do what Congress has appropriated this money for. But that's it. It just shows. You did this and he did that, and then he went back on that, and he eventually did send the 500 million. But he's been all over the place when it comes to Ukraine. When it comes to Iran and Israel, there's a remarkable continuity. I mean, it's hard to see where Trump ends and Biden begins.
There isn't. It's
right.
Continuity. Okay.
Right. Exactly. And you remember when Biden came in 2021 and he said that we're going to go back to the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and then they can negotiate and negotiate and negotiate. That never went anywhere.
Well, you know why, George? It's very simple. The Iranians said, well, if you're acting in good faith, drop the sanctions. No, we drop the sanctions after we have a deal. No, you drop the sanctions so we can negotiate a deal. I understand the Iranian position. Okay, because you can walk away from the negotiations and the sanctions are still there. So, I mean, it's not dealing with serious people.
Right. But that was the thing that when that happened, the whole point was
away from the negotiations,
yeah,
and the sanctions are still.
Yeah, the whole point was of the JCPOA was that the sanctions would be lifted, and Iran would abide by the terms of the JCPOA. But there's no evidence Iran didn't abide by it, and so Trump walked away from it. And then, because it was within the JCPOA agreement that because everyone knew that the Americans would walk away at some point, that the Europeans would somehow pick up the slack and go around the American sanctions once the Americans reimpose sanctions. But the Europeans really didn't pick up the slack, and they didn't get any of the sanctions lifting from the Europeans. They were supposed to put up a mechanism. And the Europeans never set up that mechanism.
Well, the Europeans were afraid of being sanctioned by the United States.
Exactly. But anyway, let's take a look at some of the gagglers, the people who keep the dogs going, because they're very afraid of these dogs and they get into a foul mood. So the gagglers. And so we go to our locals board. And we have our friend 60 Cents in some Silicon Valley. So it's very, very early in the morning there. And 60 Cents says, greetings from George and Peter, for George and Peter from Silicon Valley. I am hearing Israeli offensive occupation forces bombing whatever remains of Syrian military assets in Latakia.
Yeah.
Is that not near Russian military assets? Yeah, that's
Yes,
it. Yeah, go on.
go ahead. Go ahead.
No, that's right. That's what they were doing. They were absolutely hammering targets in Latakia overnight. They were hitting warehouses with shells, warehouses with missiles. They're thumping everything inside Syria. They're also occupying large chunks of territory in Syria, far beyond the Golan Heights. And now Israel has announced that they're going to increase their Golan Heights settlements.
What?
And the good news is the German government said we're not very happy about this settlements, and so Israel is our friend and ally, but we can't say we're happy about increasing settlements.
Well,
I'm sure that's going to act as a real deterrent on
well,
Israel.
obviously, a message is the Israelis are sending a message to the Russians. Number one, obviously, I don't think they're going to try to kill any Russians or destroy their infrastructure, but everything around it. Well, those roads to go to your base. Well,
Yeah.
too bad. Okay.
That's right.
And also, I don't think I'm mistaken here. I mean, the Israelis have moved up to about 25 kilometers outside of Damascus.
Right.
Okay. So
yes, no, that's exactly right. And so far, no condemnation from the new leaders in Damascus. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Apparently they don't have a problem with
well, they
Israel.
said we don't want to
conflict.
That was the official word. We don't want a conflict in the
So
middle.
We don't want a conflict with Israel.
Cauldron of conflicts.
Right. And of course, then so you have this Israel kind of bombing these targets with complete impunity, because nobody's actually condemning Israel for what it's doing. Oh, this is Israel can do whatever it wants for its security. So you can just destroy a country's infrastructure because, in theory, this might pose some threat to your security. Now, it's very strange that this is the attitude of the United States, of Europe. Guess what? These are the same countries that said Russia has no right to determine whether it faces any security threat on its borders. Absolutely no right to determine that you have NATO infrastructure right up to its borders. No right to determine whether the Baltic states, belligerent, ferociously anti-Russian Baltic states, have NATO infrastructure. They have no right at all to object to any NATO expansion. But apparently Israel has every right to destroy whatever it feels like in its neighboring countries.
Well, and it's the official line is destroying any kind of potential military resistance
Right.
or the whatever is going to fill the vacuum in greater Damascus. I'm not saying Syria, everyone. Syria's gone. Okay, it's as simple as gone.
Right.
What we could a rump state, greater Damascus, but with the Israeli forces 25 kilometers outside.
Right.
Take that on
Right.
board. But it also means the infrastructure for civil society to even exist. Okay,
Right.
because Assad must go. Okay, fine, he's gone.
Right.
We can talk about history if we want later, but they want the Arabs gone.
Right.
Okay, so
Right.
Europe, hello, here
Right.
they come again.
Right.
Okay, that's what they want. They want people
That's right.
to leave.
That's
They
right.
want them to go.
Absolutely. So we have our good friend Judy Hotchkiss has posted. It's very interesting. So Judy says, "Thank you very much, Judy. Your generosity as always." So Judy says, Trump's nominee for Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, told Ted Seides last month in a podcast that we are in the middle of a Bretton Woods realignment, coming in terms of global policy, global trade. And he said, I want to be a part of it. What do you think are the odds that Trump will talk to Putin about his desire for the BRICS countries to maintain the reserve currency dollar and will go for a comprehensive geopolitical economic settlement? I find that difficult to believe, because I can see, though, that, I mean, Scott Bessent and Trump might be in favor of some return to Bretton Woods, which I think is kind of unlikely. I mean, I don't think they're going to go back
You
to.
can't go back to the 1970s.
Yeah, exactly. 1971, when Nixon took the United States off the gold standard. And the problem is the same as the reason why Nixon did it. Nixon did it because essentially countries had no real faith in the dollar and were exchanging the dollar for gold. And very quickly, the United States was finding, hey, we're running out of gold. Because countries they had gold in their vaults. I mean, they had dollar bills in their vaults, and they said, "Hey, look, we don't have any faith in the dollar. We're just going to keep exchanging them for gold." And then Nixon was suddenly confronted, in a few more weeks, and we're not going to have any gold left in our reserves in Fort Knox. So he had to stop that the gold window. So they had no more means of exchanging their dollars for gold. But you're going to have the same problem, if you go back to the gold standard, which again, people are not going to have faith in the dollar. I mean, particularly the way the United States runs its budget deficits and its trade deficits. Countries are going to have huge dollar reserves, and the moment they say, hey, we can exchange this for gold, of course they're going to exchange it for gold. So I don't see it happening, even though Trump would maybe like it would happen. And I also don't think BRICS, and I think BRICS, it's not going to develop its own reserve currency, but I think it would like to get, at some point, it would like to get away from its dependence on the dollar.
And it is but it's not just BRICS countries. All over the world, there's been a slow but very steady de-dollarization. That's like a big word. It sounds kind of threatening to some people.
Right.
No, I mean, if you use the dollar as your currency in global trade, you're open to being sanctioned. And this is what countries want to avoid.
That's right.
I think there's a lot of misperceptions, and people that George and I like and respect, but don't always agree with. This BRICS thing is just so overblown, okay?
Right.
I mean, they're not going to have a reserve currency, maybe never, okay?
Right.
Because integrating all of these economies and to run on a certain currency, first of all, what happens if a country has high inflation? Okay,
Right.
I mean, and then it's going to start impacting this currency. Introducing it will take a very, very long time. Maybe it will eventually, but it is to de-dollarize is because the Americans have politicized the dollar. That's what they want to get away from. They want to get rid of politicization. And more and more countries are getting sophisticated enough to trade in their own currencies, like the Russians and the Chinese, the Russians and the Indians. But it's work. You need a huge infrastructure, a clearinghouse to do this. Okay, and then so let's say India and China. Okay, state to state, it's not so difficult. Okay, well, what about large companies? I don't want your rubles.
That's exactly the problem. I mean, you want to have a global reserve currency for that very reason, because then countries start, accumulating rubles or rupees. And then, well, what do you do with them? Well, the only thing you can do with them is essentially in the case of rubles, is to purchase stuff from Russia, or rupees, you're going to purchase stuff from India, which means that you're going back to a direct barter system. We sell you a certain number of barrels of oil a year, and you sell us, whatever it is, consumer goods, roughly equal in value. That's a very unsophisticated way of doing business. I mean, that's why.
But there's
to get away from direct barter.
There is a nuance to that, and that's what's being seriously thought about. I've actually talked to people that are working on it. Is that having a basket of commodities, grain, oil, copper, zinc? This is what they're thinking about. Okay, and having some kind of currency unit where you buy into that, and that's very smart. You know why? Because all of these commodities, there's a demand for real things. Okay, and that's what they're working on right now. I mean, some people say the dollar is becoming extinct. That is ridiculous. Okay, it's absurd.
Right.
Because if the dollar suddenly ceased to exist, you would have a global economic crisis that you couldn't even imagine. Okay.
Right.
And I'm not being a booster for the dollar. Okay.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
very angry that the dollar, I mean, I'm under sanction. Okay.
Right. No,
So
that's right. That's exactly the point, and that's why it's such a terrible system whereby the United States can use the its position as being the guarantor of a reserve currency to hit other countries, to punish other countries with the dollar. Hey, you're no longer able to do business. You can't any longer sell your oil because oil is denominated in dollars. You can't sell your oil because we're going to seize all of your earnings. And they did it to Iran first, and now they've done it to Russia. That's why they would like to develop some alternative currency, but it is extremely difficult to do. And then, after the recent BRICS conference, they all pretty much said, well, we don't want to de-dollarize. We don't want to challenge the dollar, precisely because it's very difficult to pull off. I'm sure that in the case of Trump and Scott Bessent, they like the idea of having the dollar as the reserve currency, and they like the idea of a strong dollar. But I think that contradicts the policy, the Trumpian policy, which is to revitalize American industry. Because if you want American industry to be competitive in world markets, I don't think a strong dollar is the way.
you need a
Strong dollar
very,
is very good to bring capital into the
okay.
United States. That's finance. If you want finance capital, then you want a strong dollar, because that's the way you guarantee money coming into Wall Street.
The messages coming out of the transition team is just mind-boggling to me. Okay, 100% tariffs. I mean, this is just ridiculous. Okay, it's chest beating. It sounds America first and all that. It's a lot more. The United States has deindustrialized itself so much and financialized itself so much. You're going to need some really, really smart people
Right.
start reversing those processes. I'm not remotely optimistic that they can. Okay, there's too many other private interests at stake here.
Right. I think so. I mean, I think that in the glory days of 1945 to 1971, America could run these trade deficits. They could have these dollars, sitting in the central banks of its allies, because they were happy with it. They were very content. Have all these dollars, and that dollar had value. So America's industry was still very competitive, simply because they had a huge reputation. The America's auto industry, enormous global reputation. They don't have it anymore, and you don't have that faith in the dollar. When banks could say, "Oh, well, that's good. We've got all these dollars in our banks, and that'll never lose its value." Hey, de Gaulle started the whole thing of, basically, hey, I have no confidence in the dollar. I'm going to sell my dollar holdings and change them into gold. And that of course then triggered the Americans. Hey, we don't have any more gold left. So I can't see going back. I mean, it's like going back to the 1945-71 era. I don't see it.
I don't either. Okay, and in living in a BRICS country, the BRICS is an alternative. It is not. It's not confronting the West. It wants to go around the West in many different things. Okay, the way they set it up. I mean, again, I hear these people. The BRICS is taking on the West and all that. No, they're not. That's just ridiculous. It's just absurd.
That's right. That's right. Now, I was looking at some of the comments on our Rumbles page, and I thought there was something interesting from Spiteful Man. I like that name, Spiteful Man. And it says, actually, one of the best leaders at the moment, in my opinion, is the Georgian Prime Minister and his team. They have handled the provocations very well, and so on. That is an interesting issue. I mean, we tend to be pessimistic about things, but the Georgians have been absolutely stalwart in refusing to bend the knee to the EU, to NATO, and from what I can see, I think Salome Zorabichvili, the French woman posing as a Georgian, I think she's done. I think today is her last day in office. I don't think she may try to provoke a constitutional crisis, but I don't see how you can if your term in office is done. You don't have any authority anymore as president.
I think all of her things have been packed up in boxes. It's sitting in the foyer, waiting for the U-Haul to put her on a plane back to Paris. Okay,
Yes, yes,
that's it.
yeah.
Okay. And what I like is that they voted in this like footballer. Now he's the
And what I also like is some of the media reports emphasize that he has no higher education. He hasn't higher. Well, we can't possibly have a president who hasn't had higher education. What is it?
It's this whole PMC bullshit. I'm so sick and tired of it. Okay.
I mean, exactly. He's a footballer, but not only is he a footballer, he was actually quite a successful footballer. I mean, he played the top clubs, so
Look,
Georgians are very proud of him.
We're getting to the point now that if you have a Harvard, a Yale education, I'm going to avoid you. Okay. Yes. You're just full of nonsense. Okay. Right. You have no idea what the real world is about, what my problems are, because I'm not going to see the world through your concerns. Okay. Right. Diversity. We need more diversity. Okay. Right. We need, we have to fight global change. Sorry, I got things to do, like my life.
Right. But it's still very interesting. I mean, I guess the point Spitefulman made is that how these Georgians suddenly got absolutely so firm and in their decision making, they would not.
It's Ukraine. I feel it's Ukraine. I feel that they're being they feel that they've been sold a fake bill of goods. Okay, if you join us, go down our path, it'll be peace and prosperity for everyone. And they're just looking around and say, look at the machinations that are going on in Moldova. The war we had with Russia, what did we get out of that? We didn't get any. Right. We lost stuff. Okay, and did we get compensated? Did we get membership in NATO? No, it's just one big tease to make us become like them. Right. And then they sell you out. Okay. Yes. As George has said 1,000 times on this podcast, the only thing the West is interested in is the real estate. They're not interested in the people.
That's right. And so it's actually, the whole thing has been very heartening. So this Georgian prime minister who looks very, very young. I mean, he's like, kind of a young, kind of quite good looking guy, and absolutely refusing to kowtow to Ursula von der Leyen, and hey, we're going to.
I saw a short video this morning of him, and he just made kind of a pro forma statement or something. I mean, he's a footballer, okay? Right. And I got the impression he was saying, "Let's go for some beer. Come on, just relax, everybody. This crazy French woman. We had to change the menu. Okay, I don't know what that stuff is in French. Okay." Going back to Georgian food is awesome.
Yes.
It's really, really good. They have great Georgian restaurants in Moscow. I love Georgian food. Okay.
That's right. Exactly. It really is great. I guess Salome Zorabichvili. I think she'll go back to Paris. I mean, I think Paris is all right. I mean, I think she's well to do. Lives in probably has a very nice apartment in Paris. I think her time in Georgia is done. I don't think there's nothing further for her to do there. She has failed. She tried to generate kind of some sort of revolution on the street, a Maidan. She failed.
Brussels has failed. They made a huge investment in Georgia and in Moldova, and it's touch and go in Moldova. Okay, it's touch. I mean, considering George. I just got over the line and all that. That's not what they were expecting. They wanted everything, including the kitchen sink. Okay, they didn't get it in either. Okay,
that's right.
I mean, this whole civilizational choice and all of this. Right. Actually, people are making a civilizational choice. Right. We don't want to get involved in your stench and your mess. Okay,
no, that's right.
I've been to Georgia many times. Guys, Georgia is a very conservative, religious country. You should see their churches
Right.
and their because they're Orthodox, and the regalia. I mean, it is awesome. It is.
Right.
It really like whoa. I mean, and it's a poor country, okay, but you see the architecture that is meaningful and that will last. It's their churches.
Yeah. That's right. No, that's right. But it's kind of interesting because you now have the three cases. You got Moldova, Romania, and Georgia. Three instances in which basically the NATO, EU tried to steal three elections. So Moldova, they outright stole it. I mean, it's just no point in even arguing about it. It's like nobody bothers arguing about it. Clearly, it was just outright theft.
They stole it fair and square.
They stole it fair and square. Romania, again, they stole it fair and square. They knew this guy, Georgescu, was heading for a very comfortable victory in the second round. They stole it. You know, they just canceled the election outright, which is quite unheard of. I can't think of anywhere this has happened where the election's going in a way you don't want. You just cancel it altogether.
Remember Huey Long? The same thing. They knew he was going to win, and he did. Okay, and that guy was a piece of work. Okay,
yeah, that's right.
They let it happen.
Yes, no, exactly. And the third case is, of course, in Georgia, where they had the election, they lost. I don't know, maybe they were expecting to win in Georgia. They lost, and then they just cried foul. Went with rent a mob, sent them out onto the streets. No, we can't do the president. No, we can't. We can't have this person as president. But the rent-a mob didn't work. So NATO and EU land, they got two. They won two of them. They got the Moldova and Romania. They failed in Georgia, and that's good for Georgia. They resisted.
Well, because they've figured out the playbook.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the whole issue of Russian meddling. It's absurd on its face because the meddling came from the U.S. State Department in Brussels. That's where the meddling came from. Very easy to document. Like I've said before, Tbilisi is an interesting city. It's the really poor parts and really modern. It's a weird mixture, but I can bet you my bottom dollar that those cafes are full every single day with NGO workers from the West.
Exactly. Well, anyway, your dogs sound like they're getting really, really pissed.
Everybody, it was one of these things people don't understand about the Russian winter. Yes, it's cold, obviously, okay? But because Moscow is so far north, okay, I'll give you an idea how far north Moscow is. Okay, think of this as New York City, okay, in North America, okay? And if you go to the longitude around New York City, it's pretty far north in the United States. New York and Rome are on the same longitude. Okay, so that shows you, how much further Europe is to North America.
So where would Moscow be? I mean, in terms of where?
Not really. Yeah. Of course, you would ask that question. Yeah. Okay, what I'm just saying, it's much, much further north. Okay, the reason why I say that is that everybody knows the winters are very long and harsh here. They are. Yes. As a result, the building code, they build it's not like Eastern Europeans and Russians. They see on American movies and serials. You build houses with wood. We build with stone. We build with bricks. And I say, yeah, because you will live in a very cold climate. And so my long introduction to that is, yes, it's cold outside, but the way they build buildings, it's really warm inside.
Yeah.
Everywhere you go, it is very, very warm to the point of oppressively warm because I spent 15 years in California in air conditioning. I always had cold air on me. Most Russians don't like air conditioning, okay? And they can go in the underground metro with their coat on, with their hat, with their scarf. As soon as I go in the metro, I have take off my hat because I'm going to start sweating. It's so hot.
Right. Okay. Right. Yeah. So. No, that's right. So that's another problem, for the dogs to cope with. So they're not in a good mood. Anyway, so I think it's time we wrapped it up. I think it was a thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you so much for all of your questions and comments, which are really interesting. Thank you for those who contributed to the tip jar, because otherwise we'd have this ferocious animal going after us. So just keep them as calm as possible for as long as possible. So tomorrow I'm doing the live stream solo. Please join me 3 p.m. Eastern time, and we will be back next Monday, same time, 10 a.m., and including Johnny Apple. So till then, goodbye.
Okay, it was good. It was good.